Hello, my name is Benjamin McKenzie. I am the Executive Director of the Grover and Sara McKenzie Family Foundation, Incorporated. The McKenzie Family Foundation was founded in 2008 by the children of Grover and Sara McKenzie. Our mission is to provide education assistance, to provide education opportunities, and to support and promote positive community involvement, which we do primarily through charitable giving. Today, I'm sitting down to have a conversation with one of the namesakes of the foundation, the patriarch of the McKenzie family, and my grandfather, Grover McKenzie Jr.
Hello, it's good to be here. I'm glad that the foundation is doing well and that things are going well. So we'll just discuss some of the things that we've seen and we hope to accomplish. Okay?
Yeah, that sounds great. How have you been doing?
Oh, I'm doing well. Things are going well as to be expected. My status where things are now, and that we're moving toward a good goal with the foundation.
That's really good to hear. So I guess we could just jump into our questions for our conversation. Can you tell me anything about your childhood and what it was like growing up in South Carolina, what you can remember?
Well, I was the middle child of five, two older brothers and two younger sisters. And we lived in or around a small town, roughly population between 7 and 10,000 people. That's a small town. But we knew everybody, and things went well. People took care of each other. So, but other than that, we had a very normal life.
Wow, I didn't know that. That is a very small town.
Well, things are different now than it was 80 years ago, 90 years ago. Right, 90 years ago, a lot of the places are cities now that was country before. So things changes.
Did you notice any changes that were happening around you when you started to grow up and maybe got into your young adulthood and your 20s and 30s?
Well, the 20s is hard to say because I was only 2.5 years old when the 30s came in. But, things in the 30s were a little different. We learned that we were part of a group that had to make things better for us. So we took care of each other. We learned that then. Right now, I think we've lost some of that. But the major part was we talked to each other.
Do you think that having to learn that lesson changed your view on the world and how you approach things?
No, I don't think so. I saw other changes. Changes in the world at that time was very rare because most people didn't come up with new ideas.
Mm.
So what we have now is we learned in our family life that we had a unit. And the unit was controlled by the parents, not controlled by the children. So we learned that we had to stand up and take care of each other.
Well, I guess that leads me into my next question, which is, was it difficult to start raising your families in the 1950s when you started to raise a family?
No, not really. Well, we had a good background from our parents because they said things will have to be certain way. I cannot, as a child, cannot force the changes as the parents had. So what you do, you learn that the parents take care of the children. And so we turn that into raising our children in the 40s, 50s.
So what values did you try and raise your children with, given the values that you were raised with?
The value of life is a unit,
Hmm.
whereas the family is a unit. Whether you live together or live apart, you are still a part of a unit because that's the starting point. And if you do not instill that in your children, chances are they will not be closely knitted like they should be. So that's what we try to instill in our children.
You had a really beautiful and loving relationship with your wife, Sarah. I called her Nana. Um, do you remember when and how you met her?
And I met her. It happened a very strange way. I came home from school, went upstairs. We lived in a house with stairs in it. And after I got up there, the lady who lived under us called me down to meet someone. So I went downstairs and we chatted for a while. I met her and we seemed to hit it off. So things got real well.
That is a really beautiful story. Like it's a tale as old as time. Um, do you have any thoughts on marriage and maintaining a successful relationship, given how successful your relationship was?
Should I have any ideas on marriage
Mhm.
at the beginning? No, it's a matter of getting to know each other and understand each other, and each other understand that both of you, if you get together, you make a unit. Nobody, this family can survive if you have two units instead of one, because decisions will have to be made. We knew that.
In this conversation, I'm really struck by how optimistic your view on family life is, your view on the relationship is. I think it's really beautiful that you've been able to have such a positive attitude throughout all of these years. I'd like to ask you a little bit about your personal history and the history that you've seen go on around you. So, firstly, how has education played a role in your life, and how was it playing a role in your raising of your children?
The whole measure of things, because you understand have to have flow of things work. If you start something, it's like a ball, it continues to roll. So you have to make sure that its path is the way it should be. You think of that as you're raising children because you tell them where they need to be and how they should get there. So that's what's the most important thing. That's what we was discussing.
Now, I know that you chose to have your children bus to school when they started attending school and during the time of civil rights. What was the impact of that decision? What did you feel that the impact of having your children bused was on your children?
Well, I knew what it like when I went to school. We walked to school and we were segregated in the school there. But segregation was not only known in the North, but it was different. So I figured that if they go to school that is mixed, their chances of getting something other than what you can go to a segregated school because the curriculums are different.
Mhm.
So all of that played a part. We wanted them to have the best of everything that they could get.
Did you know or did you feel at the time that it would have a civil rights impact and on the advancement of African Americans and colored people just by sending your children to another school?
Well, in the 60s, the civil rights movement was really great, because it got us to where we could have a voice. And that voice was We have to be a unit in order to make a difference. Okay?
Yeah.
So what you do, you say, well, you have to say, do things that you will do that will not reflect bad on other people. We learn how to fight, not physically, but mentally. But sometimes you fight by being quiet. Sometimes you fight by being obstinate, but it's all different. But you're not going in there fighting physically. You play a game just like they play on you. That is that's what won the civil rights movement.
Wow, that's such an interesting perspective. I know that you have a very interesting professional career life. Can you tell me about your story behind your professional life?
My professional year was I was working in a factory somewhere. In a town near where we lived, Pennsylvania. And I came home. My wife told me, hey, the guy in the employment office that's got paper wants to see you. So, because earlier before that, I had gone down to put an application in it. And so I, so she, but she told him, she said, well, I tell him you had a job. Well, that was good. So next day I went down to see him. And he told me that he wanted to hire me, but they didn't have a position for me yet.
Mm.
He said, we got to get you in the door so you become known, then you have a position. So what he did, he hired me. I went in, and the people, they were very nice, but they were too cordial with me. They were all black people, maybe one white. And about a year later, he said, well, now is the time. A year or two later, he said, he came up to call me downtown to his office. He said, I want you to go upstairs and get your picture taken. Say, I want you first to go and talk to this guy. Then you can do what you want to do. So he went and I talked to the guy in, it was called the tabulating department at that time. But it was really the beginning of computers. And I went there and I talked to him, and I went uptown. I got my pictures made, and they had a big announcement the next day in front of the cafeteria with my big picture there. And I was the first black to hire as a corporate employee. So I was with a group of people. Some of the people were okay, some of the people were difficult, but you learn to deal with people. You can't learn to deal with them if you got to fight their fight. You fight your fight. I learned that a long time ago. So that is the hard part of living, fighting your fight, making changes like you want.
That puts you in a very interesting position in history, being the first African American that they hired for a corporate position at this company. Um, I don't know if this is a part of it, but I wanted to ask you, what was one of the hardest things that you've had to overcome, just in your life in general?
I had to overcome a lot, but I learned, I think in my military days, that you can't win by being physically.
Hmm.
You have to learn to fight your fight, not their fight. So sometimes you win by being quiet and not saying anything. That will make people think what they will think different of you because you're not being too vocal about something. So all of that is part of the fight. So that's how it is.
I'm noticing a pattern of things that you're saying throughout this interview. Um, about fighting your fight, about it not being a physical fight, about us needing to stand together as a unit. And I just think it's so interesting to have this perspective because it's not one that we typically hear a lot of going on now. My next question is, can you think of someone in particular who has made a large impact in your life? Can you tell me about somebody who made an impact in your life?
Really? I think the person who made a big imprint in my purpose in my life was the guy he was a colonel. We were on Okinawa. And he was telling me that you can't let everybody just tell you what to do without you doing something. So I carried that with me all the way. So you learn sometimes by listening. All of that is part of life.
I agree. I want to change focus a little bit. I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about having the McKenzie Family Foundation being named after you and your wife?
I think it's a good idea because you're pointing something out to people that you can do things yourself also. You're not totally dependent on them. So if you can join, if you do that, you join as a unit instead of one person. So that's the best part. You can win with a unit because you have more vocal than in one person.
What kind of impact on society and on maybe the country would you like to see the foundation have?
Well, the things that we're doing now with the youth is what will count because they are the next group of people to fight the battle. We are the starter, and they will be the fighter. But if we keep them focused on what they need to be and where they need to be and how to be there, all of that is part of learning the learning process.
And that is one of the major missions of the foundation, um, between educational assistance and educational opportunities, especially for the youth.
Right.
So now I have some questions for you that were asked by other members of the foundation that they were just curious to get your answers on. So this first question comes from Jalen Long. Um, he wanted to know, how did you make it through the 1960s and the civil rights movement? Because I think we have a perspective looking back on it now as a really difficult time and situation, but you lived through it as a young adult.
I look at the civil rights movement as something they were trying to put on us, not they wanted. Something so you don't let that move you to be physical. You do things so you make changes. If you see, it goes back to the old adage: you can't fight a fight by yourself. You fight a fight with the enemy. The enemy will do things to you in order to provoke you. What you have to do is say, don't be provoked. Let him say what he wants, but you come back with something smarter than him. That will make him think. Okay?
Yes, I think so. This next question comes from Asir Lawler. He asked, what would you do to take your mind off of maybe the worrying things that were going on around you, especially in a time of civil unrest or in a time where you felt like maybe yourself or your family was being threatened? How did you take your mind off of that?
I don't think too much about civil unrest because civil unrest It's, it's something where you are hurting yourself and you're hurting the enemy. So both sides loses. So that's what you do. That's where you are. Because if I start fighting you and you have a group and I have a group, one of us in each group could be hurt. So all of that, so you want to look at something that can be solved more easily, not physically. Physically, people take it like a war. But you have to think, in a war, people get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
In a fight, people get hurt. So you have to think of something to get around that hurt part. Because when you hurt one person, that person carries the back to someone else, you probably hurt them.
And this question comes from Idris Haywood.
Uh-huh.
He asked, with what we see going on today in society, do you see any relation to what's going on today with the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s?
It is almost the same, but the name changes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, during the 50s, 60s, they say you can't do this, you can't do that. But in the 90s, in the 100s, it's 2000, it is not that. You are not get the chance to be in the position to make changes.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're trying to fight now, because they don't want you to make the changes over them. So that's all it is.
Wow. Again, I think that there were some really powerful themes going on throughout this conversation. Many themes about staying together as a unit, whether it's your family unit or whether it's us as a people, us as a society, or even going back to your military days, going back to your corporate days. You've had such a long and beautiful life. I'd like to thank you for sitting down and answering some of these questions with me today. It was a really pleasure to talk to you.
Well, that's not, all you have there is my opinion, how I feel. So it's up to you to form an opinion that could have a focal point of getting together as a group. That way, you can do things and you can discuss things, not physically. You want to win it without hurting anyone if you can. That's the best way.
Yes, I agree. And I think we should all agree. Again, Mr. Grover McKenzie Jr., thank you for joining me. It was a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Okay, I'm glad to be here. I hope I give you good information, something you can use.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, and have a good day.
I'd like to thank you for joining us for this conversation with Mr. Grover McKenzie Jr. Again, the patriarch of the McKenzie family, one of the namesakes of the foundation, and my grandfather. If you'd like to learn more about the McKenzie Family Foundation, you can find us online at McKenzieFamilyFoundation.org and on our Facebook page at facebook.com/McKenzie Family Foundation, where you can find out more about the causes and campaigns that we're currently promoting. And you can find out how to donate and join us. Thank you again for watching.